So yeah, my name is Sergei Sergejev. So if you read this in English, skip the J, that's Estonian pronunciation. And I'm honored to present here after such a good track of good presentations. And it will be quite challenging to fit 17 years of experience into 25 minutes, but I'll do my best. And yeah, I started my career in 2007. Actually, in one of the sponsors, Nortal, was called Web Media back then. And already at that time, I used Python scripts, like for all kind of like DB and so on, and Bash scripts. And I'm kind of like a Linux user for a very long time. But I also was a manager twice. And Christian's talk yesterday resonated, and the question was, who wants to be the manager? And I'm the person who's like, I don't want to. So when I applied for the talk, I was actually a QA lead, QA manager in Cargoo, but for the last 5 months, I'm infrastructure engineer, so building the CI systems. And I like mostly wrote tests in Python, but I also did some test scripts in PHP, in Groovy, and JavaScript. And I used Selenium when it was just back like Selenium Core. There was no even Selenium RC. Did my diploma thesis on this topic. And what's interesting, I'm not a fan of UI tests. Might be strange, but and I am kind of like a fan of BDD, but I will talk about this. I like the idea, and I think I learned a lot because I worked with one of the kind of like co-founders or co-creators of this, Chris Metz. We worked on the same team in Skype. And with that, I don't like Gherkin Cucumber. This will be covered. And kind of like I have love and hate relationship with Python. And agenda will be, like I will speak what I think is a good framework. I will explain my view of BDD and DSL, and share the story of how we did this in Cargoo, and share some lessons. And also, so you know, like I will be speaking about end-to-end API tests. So usually, if you Google API test, you will see that usually it's like rest assured or something, and there's like some JSON is being sent, some URL. And that's not what I'm speaking about. It's not like small atomic tests. As I said, not UI tests, but I will mention a few things about Playwright. And before we speak about what makes a good framework, what makes a bad framework, in my opinion, you can have your own. Quite often you can find code that is like there's no modules, there's just like some maybe copy-paste, there's no classes, there's no methods. And quite often it is generated by click and record frameworks like Selenium IDE. I think Playwright also has something like this. And it looks really magical in the beginning. But as it grows, it becomes a black hole consuming your time when you try to manage this, when you want to fix. And usually how it happens is you want to add some functionality to your test, and you already have this functionality in n places. And now you have n+1 places to manage. Like this shows that something is going wrong. And kind of like a bonus list for a bad framework is like when it is not supported with an IDE, or it uses some tools which are supported by 1 or 2 people. There are quite so many frameworks like this, actually. So what do I think from my experience is a good framework? It has to be modular, so it means there are reusable pieces of code. Those pieces should be easy to extend and easy to refactor. Like, test code is still code. You need to treat it as code. I will say that patterns and all of that is different from production system, but some of them are useful. And a good framework, or the way you write tests, it should be adapted to business domain, to people, and it should be about what you are testing, not how you are testing. And it should also be simple. But there is a catch. Simple is not easy. Like, it takes mastery, and even if something is simple, like it should be easy to understand, but everything, like you need to compare things. And I think it's essential that whatever you write, like if it's JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, .NET, whatever, it needs to have good IDE support. And it should be like supported components. For example, like when Playwright was started, it was a new thing, so you kind of like, you don't know what's the team there, but you know that there's Microsoft behind this. Like, it seems like a good thing. But if you find a framework that is supported by some 2 or 3 developers working at some company on some project, that's kind of like shady. So BDD and DSL. Before that, I'd like you people to raise your hands who did BDD. Not so many. Keep your hands. Who enjoyed it? That's the case, only one person. BDD, as you might know, it's a behavior-driven development. There's also lots of talks like what is BDD, what isn't. People confuse some things. And there's a good post by Dan North. If you Google, he writes that if he could turn back time, he will say that it's example-driven development. And it focuses on business value. And again, it's what, not how. And a lot of people, they confuse BDD with Gherkin, but Gherkin is just a scenario description language, and BDD is a process. So most important is that different people come and speak together, like, and discuss the behavior of the system and build a shared understanding. Then this is BDD. But if someone sits somewhere and writes these Gherkin scenarios, then this is not BDD. And again, like people often say Cucumber, but Cucumber is just a tool in Ruby or Java to execute those Gherkin specifications. But there's Behat for PHP, there's SpecFlow for .NET, and that's different. DSL is domain-specific language, and this is how specialists speak. And usually specialists in the area, they don't speak about selectors, arrays, clicks, IDs of a page, or queries, and so on. For example, in our domain, in supply chain management, where I work, we speak about purchase order, sales order, shipment plan, linked shipment, unlinked shipment, direct bookings, and there's like 20 types of partners for a shipment. Like that's the domain language. That's a good comment from one of the active people working on BDD. So they advise to step back from the tools, which is usually Gherkin and Cucumber. And I agree. And I interviewed a lot of people who also have this experience, who said that I tried BDD, never again. There's different stories, but still. So this was kind of like my background, what I thought that I wanted to do. And I had this idea. What if we could write tests that could be written in domain language, look like requirements, that it's possible to work with business people when you need to explain something, write the test with IDE help, so you just press the dot, select what you need, and you go, and like don't use this Cucumber thing. And to understand like why it's API testing, so what Cargoo is. It's a supply chain automation tool, which means there's like shippers, there's shipping companies, containers, there's people selling coffee, cocoa, and there's some market chains who buy this. It's a microservices architecture. There's a lot of communication via backend, and we have a lot of strange formats in the industry, like Edifact, X12. We receive quite some amount of Excels on FTP servers. Don't ask. That's how the shipping industry works. And like there is a front end where people work, of course, but there's a lot of things in the background. And these are the things that it's possible to cover with API testing. So how we made it? I took some notes from our README, so whenever a new person will join the team or even on interviews, like we have a document and I make a presentation on onboarding for those people. And in the beginning, I say that first and foremost, we write tests for other human beings. So we don't write tests for computers or whatever. It's a test. It needs to be readable. It needs to be understandable. And I also notice and say that like the tests, the small tests, that goes for developers. They can write integration tests. They can test like this payload with this endpoint. But we want to check business scenarios. That's different. I also say to people that we just don't describe how we do things. We describe what we want to do. So a user usually doesn't say, I want to click login, and then I click search, and I enter this, and then I go to 5th row. Like, you just say, I search for a shipment. And this is a good example from also like one of people in BDD community. So that's kind of like explanation that how is explaining how the system is built. You change the system, you throw out the test. But if you focus on the what, you can, I don't know, rewrite the front end from React to Vue.js, and the test should still work. You change the back end, still should work. What else is important? Test should be, like when I say that test should be user readable, it means that there's good naming. So like DSL, you have to have descriptive logging, good assertion messages. There will be examples. It's good to have a Fluent approach and try to avoid copy-paste. If you do this, then you're going in the wrong direction. One example of naming things. So when I joined, we had an old framework, and always it was like response items, 0, something, and something. And for me, it was like, what is even going on here? Like, it's so hard to understand this. Turns out there was a request, there was a response, and it's a shipment, like a JSON model. So why not just like assign this to a variable and use shipment? Like instead of this ID, use shipment ID. And how I wanted this to build is to be sort of like a Lego. So you need first to build the building blocks. It takes time, but then you can do great things with this. And I also say that we are growing software, so we need to refactor this. There's some pattern emerges. Like you created something in a test, but then you see that you need to reuse, so like you refactor and all of these things. And yeah, things will change. And this is what we had when I joined Cargoo. So there was such an exotic framework called Golem. It's even hard to Google this. You need to Google Golem Python. And already back then it was stuck on a quite old Selenium version. It was maintained by 3 people. It didn't have proper IDE support, so this is in PyCharm. It's all colored red, and like my eyes were bleeding. There's no autocomplete, there's no refactoring, you just like need to copy paste, and those like when you read store ref number, that's actually a variable. So my question to the authors of the framework, why? Why you cannot use a variable? And it took the team back then huge amount of time to maintain, to create new tests, and as a QA lead, quality manager, I had to do something. And example of a test that we have now. So I guess you can understand what is happening here. Like you create a shipment, you delegate it, and you check something. Like it's a domain specific. Maybe you don't understand what exactly it means. But I guess if someone would explain what allocation is and forecasts, like you would understand. A more complex case. So again, you set up something. Actually, the JSON model, that's what the business uses. Like they actually insert this in the UI. And yeah, you add the setup. You create something that triggers this. You check that it works. Really easy to understand. And in the end, like we have this with the Lego. You have a library to work with the application. It's hard to create. Usually when I was onboarding each team, it took them a month or two to understand, to create kind of like this methods to use. And but then it will speed up. It becomes easier and easier, and it's really easy to maintain. And how this library is built, so there's like several layers. So there is an endpoint. An endpoint, you can think that this is like just like request in Postman. Models, it's whatever is being sent to the endpoint or received. Enum is for hard-coded values. And the entity, like I will speak on this separately. That's something like with the business logic and the base test. And in more detail. So for endpoint, we have a class called emails, or like email service, and that's what it does. So get list of mails in this mailbox. It doesn't have any state. It's like you can do this in Postman, the same thing. You send a request, you get a response. That's it. If you define this object twice, there's no sense because like they will be equal. A model is like we have a package, and there's classes. Some are JSON dictionaries, some are data classes, which is like really useful thing. And we use builder pattern with Fluent interfaces. There will be examples. But we also do store some XML files, X12 files, and Excels. And that's an example of a model stored in JSON. That's an example of data class, and I will suggest you to use data classes because it's more convenient and better to operate. When I was just creating this, I actually did kind of like missed such thing as data class. And this is a Fluent interface. So when we want to build a model that we want to send, like usually it's JSON, how it was done before. People just like merged arrays and added something there and some obscure values. But here we have methods that like they return self, and you can connect this with a dot and say that, yeah, I want this, this, and that. So you can actually read this with the business. So when they ask like, what does this test do, or what's the request you are sending, you can show this, you can work on this, you can add a dot and update this. So it's really good. Enums, if you don't know, it's a set of named values with a given type. So you can think of Boolean type as a enum, where element is named true or false, and value is 1 or 0. And that's example of different shipment statuses we have in the system. And when it's used like this, so we don't copy-paste the string, like delegated or the code, because when you read the test, you see like code 210, like what's this? Like some people remember, but you can use this. It's much more readable. An entity is a representation of something in the system, so it has a state. So it might have some ID inside, ID of a company, ID of itself, like if it's a shipment, like there's a shipment ID. It might have links to other connected entities. And entities, they have some parameters, those IDs, and they have behaviors. And here's an example of different parameters an entity can have. And here's an example of different behaviors a shipment might have. So there's different assertions we want to check if this shipment in this given moment has something we can act on this. And it's kind of like DSL, so you can like work with this. You can create tests right on a grooming meeting, or at least like if you don't have something marked like to do. Base class. Base class is glue code. So you have all those helpers, you have the entities, you have requests, you have those builders. You need to do something. If you do, you need something to connect those. If you do this right inside the test, it will grow huge. And at least we have tests that have some part repeatable, some part has different flows inside it. So we use different variables to go into different flows. And for this, we use base class. So like instead of calling all of this in the test, you can just say like create shipment. And you know that in your test suite, your default shipment, you can just like call it there. And I know that sometimes like people who use pytest, they advise to use fixtures, but we had issues that sometimes we need to create some part of this, then we need to do something and then continue with this. So fixtures, they work right away before the test, and sometimes it's useful and we use it, but in many places it was not good. That's an example of a method inside a base class. So we need to build something, we need to create an object with this JSON, and then we need to use this object. And we have a wrapper that wraps all these methods, just like, say, create shipment. And that's an example what kind of like this base test class has. Also with pytest, it's very good that you can parameterize tests. So instead of creating similar tests which have just like slight difference somewhere, you can pass different values. So for example, we have a huge test that verifies different container events, and there's at least 26 of them. So just one test, we mark the container event that we want to trigger. We have some result we want to check, and we just iterate this test. And how it is now that in 2 years we have more than 800 tests. Of them, 650 are API tests, and that's just in the naming. Because of this parameterization, the number will be bigger. They're kind of like auto-generated. And we had a good case where, for the very first component that we covered with this, the backend changed. So we switched from one storage engine to Elasticsearch. Because of this, the request URL changed. That's basically, you need to pass this in an Elastic query. And we updated those in 2 days. So if we will do this the old way, it will take maybe a month, maybe more. And how it was done, like with this structure that I showed you before, we just went to the very low level that asks the endpoint. We changed in one place, everything works. That's what modularity is all about. And on the second day, there were a few changes with this refactoring. Like there was some business logic that needed to be updated. And I didn't tell in the beginning, all those tests for the old framework, they were run on a single Windows machine at night. It was very slow, and some tests, like there was like a schedule that one suite is run on some other on one date, other suite on another date, and the releases just happened. So my question to the team who was working there was that, why are you testing? Like, you test this service today, but it's not being released for 2 months, and this service has releases for this amount, like almost every day, but it is not tested. So now it's like in pipelines, they're connected to releases. We have more agents, everything is auto-scalable, nothing exotic, and yeah, everything is made of already available components. And the result of this library, I also like to say to our team that it's just like an API for our API. And if we would have a lot of free time or nothing to do, we could program our own front end for the application. And some examples about how we do things, how we compare things, for example. So we compare data classes. We compare JSONs with deep div. It's a very cool tool. You can submit ignore list and compare responses with this. XML div for XML. So again, like you can pass what you can skip, what you want to compare. With Playwright, turns out in many places people don't know that such functionality exists for several years. That you can screenshot an element, then you can compare with the pillow. You can Google this, it's easily findable. And you can create a master screenshot. You can pass pass a mask, which will ignore certain dynamic places, and it can save you a lot of time. Instead of checking all of these elements, you'll be like element, get value, compare. You can just compare with a screenshot. We use PyHumcrest for assertions. It allows better assertion message creation. It's more readable than default. And also AssertPy looks very good. About business, logs. So in BDD, the good thing is that you can read the test, and then the output is also like colorful and good, like what's going on and so on. So I solved this with logs. So this is info level log. If business says what is being tested, I can just like create this kind of like log, or get it from the CI system and say like this is what we do. Like that's the email, that's all these builder patterns, like with this with the shipment company and so on. Everything is logged, and business people can then read this. That's a more complex scenario, like business rules that we want to check. And I think that's really cool. And this is how this logging is done. So there's some method, this helper method from the library. In the very beginning, like we have a rule to like say what it does. And there's some implementation in other places about how to actually log this. And for development, we use like debug, so we get more information. And I think it also helps a lot with debugging tests. And there's color coding. So yellow is debug, response is green, request is blue, rules are purple. Everything is sorted and pre-printed. So whenever there's an error in CI or whatever, we have like the whole log file, we can check. And in my opinion, in my experience, that's really important for the experience of writing and maintaining tests. And yeah, how we run. So we have release triggers. So if someone deploys a release to a test environment, it can trigger a run. We have scheduled runs, and we use Azure DevOps for our CI system. And then it will start the test, which will auto-start a container with this, run the tests, all the test results, logs, screenshots. For Playwright, we record the videos, so all of that gets uploaded to the pipeline run. You can see the artifacts, you can see the video where it failed, you can see the diff of the screenshots created with this pillow library, like what was missing. So we don't have any other reporting system. For us, it's okay. And Azure DevOps is not the best. So if you have GitHub or something else, then it might be even more convenient. And last but not least, issues and advice. Maybe you saw this comic. So I came to the company and said, OK, let's do this differently. Luckily, it's not like on this comic, so people, like we had a retrospective after 1 year, after 2 years, and people actually really liked it. Some people from our outsourcing partner, they left their job, so they went elsewhere or in another project, and they say that they're really happy with the results, so like this knowledge lives already in other projects. And issues I find is that there's no good standards for testing in general, so if you Google for API testing, you will be stuck with advices how to do rest assured things, like just like some atomic tests. There's, I think, no one sees a need for end-to-end API testing. I tried to implement something in UI, but I didn't have enough capacity, and this was for other people. And they stick with the page object, so like, there's nothing, they do the how part, not the what. Tests are still hard to create, especially UI tests. And as I mentioned, there's this ramp-up time of about 1-2 months. In some contexts, it might be not available. And also, like some of the tests, when we create those, manual tester finds $50 in this 1 week. So you still should have this. And we had issues with Chromium, so we're stuck on some old version, because starting from Chromium 136, both Firefox and Chrome have some issue and like just fails. So we need to debug this at some point. I would also say that base class was a bad idea, or it was executed not so well, because every test suite has repeatable stuff like to create a shipment, create an order, and so on. So we should have used a global base class, or just like move everything to this helper methods like entities and so on. And I said I have a love and hate relationship with Python, and even with PyCharm, it's really hard to refactor sometimes. It sees a name, ID, it will refactor, remove all the IDs from all the methods. It's crazy. So instead we have shipment ID instead of ID. And my advice when you create something like this, set a goal, understand what you want to do. So for me it was to write understandable tests. For others it might be actually quantity. Others want collaboration, and maybe then the proper BDD with Gherkin and Cucumber will be better. Have collaborative sessions. It's important, because if you're like in a separate silo and you just like write tests, might be kind of like not so efficient. If you write or you create such a framework, test suite, invest time in teaching your team how to use IDE, how to use refactoring. Also one point, how to use GitHub Copilot. It's actually really good what you can do with this, like refactoring, ask to make a code review, find duplication. And I've had a lot of screen sharing sessions with my colleagues that I just show that, okay, I'm explaining what I do, and they learn things. Naming things is also very important. And speaking about the team, you need to understand the target audience. Don't overcomplicate things. I hired my team, so I checked, I knew what is needed. But we also have an outsourcing partner, and there for some people it was harder to onboard. Your situation might be different. Maybe you have like really strong test automation engineers who understand all of this, and you can take like extra step with all the models, with all the enums and so on. But in other cases, you need to keep things simpler. You also need to grow local champions. My issue was that I was alone and there was 15 people to teach. So I was kind of like on the verge, and I had like management responsibilities. So luckily I had some people who I grew into like local champions who covered some other teams. And nothing will be perfect, so some things will suck. And some more advice. To refactor better, use MyPy. So it's a tool to generate and check for typing in Python. Use RAF for formatting. Do not reinvent REST library. Like I have a really ugly wrapper to have all this logging and so on. And people, when they open, they just like, I'm not touching this. Maybe for colored logs, investigate library called Rich. And be prepared that you need to change things. Context will change. You will learn more things. You will discover patterns. And just a reminder, when people see this, they say like, yeah, maybe someone will be watching this on YouTube, or there's some managers there that we need to automate all the things. Please, we need to remember that automated tests is just automated regression tests. It's not testing, it's regression testing. It's just like one part of this. Some things are better left not automated or like scripted. And however good your automation suite is, quality comes from process, not from automated tests. But automated tests, they're part of the process. And last but not least, if you automate a mess, if you don't have a good process, you will get an automated mess. And I think in some of the talks it was mentioned that if you break something and it's like well automated, then just like propagates. Same with the bad process, just will propagate. And if you want to learn more, that's what influenced my work. So there's a really good video from Sergei Sergejev about exactly this thing, like you're testing what. There's a good article about Fluent builder pattern. There are several articles about naming things. And I would recommend the books in the list. If you have not enough time, read the last book, the discovery book. If you want to learn more about how to automate this, what are alternative patterns, read the BDD in action. And that's it. You can add me on LinkedIn, ask questions there. Maybe someday I will post an example of such a framework on GitHub, but not this time. Sorry, but maybe later. Or if there will be lots of requests for this. Thank you.
So we have time to take a couple of questions. Go ahead, come in.
Hello, thank you for the great talk. So you showed a great picture of how you run your tests, and there was written that the code is deployed. So do you have some stable environment where you run those tests, or how do you manage with multiple systems?
So yes, we have a test environment, and developers, like, we don't have continuous delivery. We need to be careful what we deploy. There's like different customers, they have own requests. So whenever the team decides that they push this feature to test environment, they do a release, and in the release there's a configuration sometimes to trigger the tests. Does this answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, do you mock something out that, or do you have issues with the stability also?
Some things are mocked, for example, some external services, but most of the cases it's all local, so we don't have so much mocks.
Okay, and do you do manual testing also in the same environment, or do you
Yes.
Okay, but do you deploy the versions tested into this environment, and how do you make sure that if multiple systems, I don't know how to end this question, but maybe you understand what I mean, like how do you ensure stability, like multiple teams are working, and some people want to test something that's partly buggy, and the tests run through. How do you make sure that the run says something valuable?
Well, sometimes things do break, so there's a release, and quite often the test will fail, and we'll see in Slack that like the test result is red, and like people can write to the chat that, hey, like this release broke this. They can pinpoint who released that. Sometimes like we don't have like 100% coverage, so something gets deployed, and then all the testers, they write in the chat that there's, I don't know, some shipment search is broken or something. So it's like pretty fast. Like we don't have separate environments. We have ability to do that, but there's not enough time to share about that. We can set up a sandbox for some other feature, and we can run tests there if something is long developed. So there's different ways.
Okay, thank you.
One, two, and then it's it.
There was a login for business people and for you guys, yes?
Yeah.
Do you write it by yourself in the code? You know, string log something in the code?
Yes. There was.
So it's that double job for you guys, because you need to write a method and also add description for you guys and for business. It's time consuming for you guys.
No, for ourselves, we just use extra logging. It's the same, we don't duplicate.
Okay.
So, for example, the kind of like the info level, the first, it says what this method does.
Okay.
So if we create a user, it will say that user with such email and password was created. For debug, for development, it will also say what was the JSON payload and what was the JSON response. Like that's the difference.
And do really guys from business read your steps inside the test?
And that's a good question. When it was implemented, there was a request for this, and we agreed to have this rule. but I think actually it was not used that often. But sometimes when it's needed, like it's there. So I guess we are like who uses this, who write the tests. We are the main users of those logs, and I think it really helps. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. My experience has been like this part is really important, but I end up spending most of my time dealing with environments and test data. You addressed the first part, the environment part, but what about test data? Are you creating everything you need? Do you have like a golden set of data, or what's your like test data strategy?
It will depend on a test suite and on a team. So for some tests, everything is created from scratch. But in many other places, like someone goes and needs to configure this manually. And then we just like use the same ID we reuse. So when we set up a sandbox, we know that we need to add such and such company. And then we copy the ID, put this in the env file, and reuse that. Maybe someday we want to automate this sandbox creation to make it even better, and there will be some script that will pre-populate what is needed. But for now, there was no strong need for this.
But what about parallelization? Like some tests are modifying data, some of them are expecting some kind of state. And
they don't overlap. So there's different platforms, different companies, users. It doesn't overlap.
So you've done it manually, like the parallelization?
There is no parallelization, but for example, one team, they will use their own user and company. Other team will use other login, company, and setups and configurations. And tests, most of the tests they run, they don't overlap. Because if you're like logged in as a user of a system, so there's a company, and you have 5 users. And when they operate, they don't interfere with each other. And
so it's like multi-tenant, or you can have different companies and the data is kind of separated.
Yeah, like if in UI, like it doesn't matter like what's the thing. It might be same login, but if you create a shipment, you get the ID, you work with this ID, and the other test works with another ID. That's it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. And Sergei, I'll have a little bit of chocolate for you. And thanks again.
I'm just skipping chocolate and sweets.
Just sweets, just sweets. Thank you, Sergei.
Thank you. Aitäh.